Welcome to History to Fall Asleep. Tonight, we are stepping quietly into a world that lasted for more than 1,000 years. Although the people who lived there would not have called it the Byzantine Empire. They called themselves Romans. Their capital was Constantinople, a city of domes and harbors, deep wells and crowded markets, candlelit churches and echoing stone halls. It stood where Europe and Asia seemed to lean toward one another, with water on nearly every side, and ships forever passing through its narrow blue strait. The story of Byzantium is sometimes told as a story of emperors, wars, and sudden disasters. Those things happened, of course, but there was also a slower story. A story of bakers opening before dawn, of scribes warming their hands above a lamp before copying a page, of sailors watching the wind at the edge of the Sea of Marmara, of families carrying bread home through streets bright with mosaics and shadowed by arches. For centuries, this empire held together pieces of the ancient Roman world while changing into something new. It spoke more and more Greek. It prayed in richly decorated churches. It argued about images, law, and faith. It traded silk, spices, icons, and books across 3 continents. It lost provinces, rebuilt walls, and learned, again and again, how to continue after a shock. There is no need to hurry through any of it. Tonight, you can simply let each fact arrive, one at a time, like the soft splash of an oar against dark water. Some facts will lead us beneath the great dome of Hagia Sophia. Some will take us inside a monastery, a palace, a city market, or a distant frontier fortress. Others will remind us that history is not only made by rulers, it is also made by ordinary people who cook, travel, pray, work, repair, and wait. If you enjoy slow historical journeys like this one, you are welcome to subscribe to History to Fall Asleep. But for now, settle into a comfortable place. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders fall a little lower. Let the noise of the day move farther away. Tonight, we will travel through 100 sleepy facts about the Byzantine Empire. Let us begin. Fact 1. The people we call Byzantines usually called themselves Romans. The word Byzantine is useful today, but it is not the name most people inside the empire used for themselves. They thought of their state as the Roman Empire, and they called their emperor the Emperor of the Romans. Even after the old city of Rome was no longer the political center of their world, Roman law, Roman institutions, and Roman memory remained important. This can feel surprising because the empire later spoke most Greek and developed a distinctly Christian culture. Yet, identity does not always follow a single language or a single city. For the people of Constantinople, being Roman meant belonging to a long political tradition that reached backward into antiquity. In a calm and practical sense, their empire was not trying to imitate Rome from a distance. It believed it was Rome, still living, still governing, and still adapting beside the Eastern Sea. Fact 2. The name Byzantine comes from the older city of Byzantium. Before Constantinople existed, there was a Greek settlement called Byzantine. It stood beside the Bosporus, the narrow waterway that joins the Black Sea to the Mediterranean world. The old name survived in the work of later historians who began using Byzantine to distinguish the Eastern Roman Empire from ancient Rome and from later Western states. The term became common long after the empire itself had ended. That small detail tells us something gentle about history. Names can outlive the people who used them, and a familiar label can hide a much more complicated reality. When we say Byzantine Empire tonight, we are using a modern map label. Behind it are many centuries of people who saw their city as New Rome and their lives as part of a continuing Roman story. Fact 3. Constantinople stood at one of the most useful locations in the medieval world. The city was built on a peninsula between the Golden Horn, the Sea of Marmara, and the Bosporus. Water protected it on 3 sides, while the strait connected routes between Europe and Asia. Ships moving toward the Black Sea passed close by. Land routes also met nearby, carrying goods, travelers, diplomats, pilgrims, and news. This did not make Constantinople invincible, but it made it unusually hard to ignore. A ruler there could watch sea traffic, tax commerce, and send fleets in several directions. A merchant could find products that had traveled from far away. A visitor could arrive by boat and see the city rise above the water in layers of walls, roofs, towers, and domes. Geography gave the empire a strong beginning, but it also meant that many rivals dreamed of taking the same place for themselves. Fact 4. Constantine founded his new capital there in the 4th century. In the year 330, the Emperor Constantine formally dedicated the city that came to bear his name. He presented it as a new imperial center, often remembered as New Rome. The choice made sense. The eastern half of the Roman world was wealthy, populous, and connected to major frontiers. From Constantinople, an emperor could reach the Balkans, Anatolia, the eastern Mediterranean, and the Black Sea more easily than from the old capital in Italy. The city was enlarged with public buildings, forums, baths, churches, and places for spectacle. It was not built from nothing, because Byzantium was already there, but it was transformed on a grand scale. Over time, Constantine's decision shaped more than 1,000 years of history, giving the Roman state a new home at the meeting point of continents. Fact 5. The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not end the Roman Empire everywhere. When imperial rule in Western Europe weakened and changed in the 5th century, the Eastern Roman Empire continued from Constantinople. The western half experienced repeated political upheaval, while the Eastern government kept its capital, its tax system, its army, and much of its administrative machinery. This does not mean the East was calm or simple. It faced invasions, court struggles, religious disputes, and financial pressure of its own. But it remained a major state long after the old Western Empire had broken into separate kingdoms. For people living in Constantinople, the continuation of Roman rule was not a strange historical puzzle. It was everyday life. Officials wrote documents, Soldiers received orders, and coins carried imperial images. The empire endured because institutions, people, and habits kept working even as the world around them changed. Fact 6. Greek gradually became the empire's main language. Early Byzantine government still carried much of Rome's Latin inheritance. Legal formulas and official titles often had Latin roots. Yet most people in the Eastern Mediterranean already spoke Greek in daily life, and Greek became increasingly central in administration, learning, and worship. By the 7th century, Greek was firmly established as the empire's chief official language. This shift was not a sudden switch in a single room. It happened across generations, through schools, markets, churches, and offices. The result was a culture that was Roman in political memory, Christian in faith, and Greek in much of its language. That combination is one reason Byzantium can seem unfamiliar at first. It was not simply ancient Greece, not simply old Rome, and not simply a medieval kingdom. It was a layered world where several inheritances continued at once. Fact 7. Christianity became deeply woven into Byzantine public life. The empire inherited a Roman world in which Christianity had become increasingly important. Over time, churches, bishops, monasteries, saints' days, and religious ceremonies became part of the ordinary structure of life. Faith was not kept neatly separate from politics. Emperors cared about church councils. Patriarchs and bishops could influence public debate. A religious procession might also be a civic event, moving through streets where citizens could see their rulers, clergy, and neighbors together. This does not mean everyone agreed about belief. In fact, Byzantium experienced long and serious theological disagreements. But it does mean that Christianity shaped the rhythm of the calendar, the appearance of cities, the language of art, and the hopes people carried into difficult times. In a Byzantine city, bells, chanting, incense, and public worship formed part of the background sound of the world. Fact 8. The emperor was powerful, but he still depended on many other people. Byzantine emperors could issue laws, appoint officials, command armies, and appear in glittering court ceremonies. Yet even a strong ruler needed support. He needed generals to defend borders, tax officials to gather revenue, clerks to keep records, sailors to move, supplyists to conduct worship, and city people to remain calm during a crisis. Dynasties could seem stable from far away, but court life was often uncertain. An emperor might be challenged by a relative, a military commander, or a political faction. That uncertainty made ceremonial display important. Processions, robes, crowns, and carefully staged appearances helped turn a human ruler into a visible symbol of order. Still, behind the gold and silk were ordinary systems of work. Power depended not only on a throne, but on countless hands carrying messages, repairing ships, measuring grain, and copying orders. Fact 9. The hippodrome was more than a place for races. In Constantinople, the hippodrome was a vast arena where chariot races drew enormous crowds. It stood close to the imperial palace, making it one of the places where rulers and residents could see one another directly. The races were exciting, but the crowds also had political importance. Fans supported racing teams known by colors, especially the blues and greens. These groups were not merely sports clubs in the modern sense. They could reflect neighborhood loyalties, social networks, and political feeling. A cheering crowd could become a protesting crowd very quickly. The hippodrome, therefore, belonged to the daily life of the city and to the high drama of imperial politics. On quieter days, it was a place of noise, dust, horses, and anticipation. On more dangerous days, it could become the place where the mood of an entire capital turned visible. Fact 10. Constantinople depended on water systems beneath its streets. A large city needs water, and Constantinople could not rely only on nearby springs. Aqueducts carried water from beyond the city, while cisterns stored it underground. Some cisterns were enormous, with rows of stone columns rising from shallow water, like a hidden forest. These reservoirs helped the city endure dry periods and sieges. Above ground, people saw fountains, baths, gardens, and busy homes. Below ground, water waited in the dark. It is a peaceful image to hold in mind. A city of crowded streets resting over quiet chambers of stored water. The cisterns were practical, but they were also part of Constantinople's resilience. Treat. A capital that could collect and preserve water had a better chance of surviving when roads were blocked. Fields were damaged, or enemies waited outside the walls. Fact 11. The city was famous for its formidable land walls. Constantinople's most famous defences stood along its western landward side. The Theodosian walls, built and expanded in late antiquity, used multiple lines of defence, including ditches, outer walls, and stronger inner walls with towers. For centuries, these fortifications helped protect the capital from armies that might otherwise have swept across the peninsula. No wall is truly permanent, and the system required repairs after earthquakes and attacks. Yet, the scale of these defenses impressed visitors and frightened attackers. A person walking beside them could see how much planning, labor, and stone had been gathered to defend one city. The walls were not only military objects. They shaped the city's edge, its gates, its movement, and its sense of safety. They were a long-built promise that the capital intended to remain where it was. Fact 12. Food arrived in the capital through wide networks of supply, and a city as large as Constantinople could not feed itself from its own streets and gardens. Grain, olive oil, wine, fish, fruit, and other goods came by sea and land from regions across the empire and beyond it. Ships entered the harbors, carts moved through gates, merchants bargained in markets, bakers turned flour into loaves. Officials watched supplies carefully, because shortages could cause unrest. Food was therefore never merely private. It was part of imperial stability. A sack of grain might seem humble beside a crown or a sword, but bread could matter just as much to the future of a ruler. In the evening, after markets quieted, the city was still connected to distant farms, fishing boats, vineyards, and ports. Its daily meal was a map of the wider world. Fact 13. The solidus became one of the medieval world's most trusted coins. Byzantine gold coins, especially the solidus, were widely respected for their quality and reliability. For centuries, merchants and governments valued them because they were made to a consistent standard. Coins traveled far beyond the empire's own borders. They passed in markets, ports, palaces, and monasteries. They could pay soldiers, settle debts, mark gifts, and make a ruler's image visible in distant places. A coin is a small object, but it can hold a whole political message. It says that somewhere a government has the power to mint, regulate, and guarantee value. Byzantine coins often carried Christian symbols and imperial portraits, blending faith and authority in a space small enough to rest on a palm. Long after a particular emperor died, his coins could keep moving through the world, quietly carrying his name. Fact 14. Silk helped make Constantinople a center of luxury and craft. Silk was one of the most prized materials in the Byzantine world. Its color, softness, and shine made it suitable for imperial clothing, church textiles, diplomatic gifts, and elite display. Constantinople became famous for silk workshops and for fabrics woven with elaborate patterns. Some designs used animals, plants, riders, or repeating geometric forms. Silk was not only beautiful, it was also political. A splendid garment could show rank at a glance. A roll of cloth could serve as a valuable gift in delicate negotiations. Trade in silk tied the empire to long-distance networks reaching across Asia and the Mediterranean. In a dim workshop, the process began with threads, dyes, looms, and skilled hands. In a palace or church, the finished fabric could look almost like light itself had been woven into cloth. Fact 15. Byzantine. Byzantine officials used seals to make documents trustworthy. The empire produced a great many orders, letters, grants, tax records, and legal documents. To show that a message truly came from a particular official, writers often used seals. A small lead seal could be attached to a document with cords, then stamped with an image and inscription. The seal made tampering more difficult and gave the receiver a clue about who had sent the message. Many of these objects survive today, even when the paper or parchment they once protected has disappeared. They are tiny records of administration, faith, and personal identity. A seal might show a saint, a cross, an emperor, or an official title. It reminds us that the empire was held together not only by armies and ceremonies, but also by messages that had to travel safely from one place to another. Fact 16. The imperial palace was a complex world of rooms, ceremonies, and guarded entrances. Near the Hippodrome and Hagia Sophia, the great palace of Constantinople formed a vast ceremonial and administrative center. It was not a single simple building, but a changing collection of halls, courtyards, chapels, offices, and private spaces. Visitors might move through carefully controlled routes, seeing guards, officials, curtains, mosaics, and displays of imperial wealth. Court ceremony could be extremely detailed. Who stood where, who spoke first, and what clothing was worn all mattered. These rituals helped make the empire feel ordered even when politics behind the scenes were tense. The palace was a place where an emperor could seem distant and almost sacred, yet it also contained kitchens, servants, paperwork, repairs, and ordinary human worries. Grand institutions are often like that, magnificent from the outside, busy and practical within. Fact 17. The Patriarch of Constantinople was one of the most important church leaders in the empire. The Patriarch was the leading bishop of Constantinople and held a major place in the religious life of the Byzantine world. His relationship with the emperor could be close, cooperative, uneasy, or openly strained, depending on the moment. Patriarchs took part in ceremonies, councils, and debates about doctrine. They also helped make the capital a center of Christian authority. Yet the church was not governed by one single voice. Bishops, monks, theologians, and communities across the empire could all take part in disagreement. This made Byzantine religious history lively and sometimes difficult. Questions that may sound abstract now could matter deeply to people then, because they touched how Christians understood God, worship, salvation, and the images around them. The Patriarch stood near the center of these conversations, where faith and public life met. Fact 18. Monasteries gave people places for prayer, study, work, and refuge. Monastic life became an important part of Byzantine society. Monks and nuns lived in communities that followed rules of prayer, discipline, and shared labor. Some monasteries stood in crowded cities. Others were built on islands, mountain slopes, or remote valleys. Their routines could be quiet and regular. Prayers at set hours, meals, reading, farming, hospitality, and care for buildings or guests. Monasteries also became places where manuscripts were copied and preserved. They could own land, receive donations, and influence local life. Not every monk lived in the same way. Some sought solitude, while others belonged to large organized communities. But together, monasteries created a network of spiritual and cultural centers across the empire. In a restless age, their bell times and candlelit services offered a rhythm that many people found steady and meaningful. Fact 19. Byzantine scribes copied texts by hand for generations. Before printing, every book had to be copied by hand. Byzantine scribes worked with ink, parchment, pens, rulers, and patience. They copied religious writings, legal works, histories, poems, medical texts, and ancient Greek literature. A manuscript could take a long time to create. Pages had to be prepared. Lines had to be measured. Words had to be written carefully enough to be read by someone else, perhaps decades or centuries later. Some manuscripts were plain and practical. Others were decorated with gold, colored initials, and painted scenes. Through this labor, many works from the ancient Greek world remained available to later readers. The act of copying was both humble and powerful. A scribe sitting quietly in lamplight could become a bridge between distant centuries, passing thoughts forward one page at a time. Fact 20. Mosaics filled churches with color that changed in the light. Byzantine mosaics were made from tiny pieces of glass, stone, or other material called tesserae. Some pieces contained gold leaf beneath glass, giving walls and domes a soft, shimmering glow. In a church lit by lamps or daylight, the surface did not look flat. It seemed to flicker as a person moved. Images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, saints, emperors, and angels could appear against fields of gold, creating a sense of sacred space beyond ordinary time. Mosaics were not simply decorations. They helped shape worship, memory, and emotion. They made theology visible to people who entered the building. Even today, when many have been damaged, covered, restored, or moved, their surviving fragments suggest how powerful a Byzantine interior once felt. Stone and glass could make a wall seem almost weightless. Fact 21. Justinian became one of the best-known Byzantine emperors. Justinian ruled from 527 to 565, during a period when the empire was wealthy, ambitious, and under great pressure. He wanted to strengthen Roman rule, reform law, support Christian institutions, and recover territories that had been lost in the West. His reign brought remarkable building projects, military campaigns, and legal work. It also brought war, disease, high taxes, and serious unrest. That mixture is why Justinian remains so fascinating. He was not simply a builder or simply a conqueror. He ruled through many contradictions. His era produced the great church of Hagia Sophia, but it also saw the destruction of the Nika revolt and the terrible spread of plague. When historians look at Justinian, they see a ruler trying to make the Roman world whole again, even as the world itself was becoming more difficult to hold together. Fact 22. Empress Theodora was a powerful figure at Justinian's court. Theodora, Justinian's wife, became one of the most famous empresses in Byzantine history. Sources about her are not always neutral, and later writers often shaped her story to suit their own views. Still, it is clear that she held unusual influence at court and took part in major decisions. She appeared with Justinian in official imagery and was treated as a partner in imperial authority. One famous mosaic at San Vitale in Ravenna shows her surrounded by attendants dressed in richly patterned clothing. Her life reminds us that women in Byzantine history could hold serious political and religious influence, especially within the imperial family. Theodora's story is often dramatic, but it also shows something quieter. Court power depended on relationships, trust, persuasion, and the ability to act decisively when a ruler needed counsel. Fact 23. The Nika revolt began in the Hippodrome and shook the capital. In 532, tensions in Constantinople erupted into the Nika revolt. Crowds connected to the racing factions in the Hippodrome joined in anger against the government. The unrest grew into a dangerous challenge to Justinian's rule. Buildings burned, and for a time the emperor's position seemed uncertain. The revolt was eventually crushed with great violence, leaving a deep mark on the city. It is not a gentle event, but it teaches a gentle historical lesson. Even a powerful capital could become unstable when resentment, politics, and public spectacle came together. The hippodrome, normally a place of racing and celebration, became the center of a crisis. Afterward, Justinian rebuilt on an even grander scale. The city changed, but it also carried the memory of how close it had come to losing its ruler. Fact 24. Hagia Sophia was built with astonishing speed after the revolt. After earlier churches on the site were destroyed during the Nika revolt, Justinian ordered a new church dedicated to holy wisdom, or Hagia Sophia. Construction began in 532, and the building was completed in 537, an extraordinary pace for such a vast project. The architects, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus, used bold engineering to create a space unlike most churches of the time. The building would later be repaired and altered after earthquakes and political change, but its main impression has remained powerful for centuries. Visitors entering beneath its dome often felt that the ceiling floated above them. Hagia Sophia became the central church of Constantinople and one of the defining monuments of Byzantine civilization. It was architecture on a scale meant to make people pause, look upward, and feel the limits of ordinary imagination. Fact 25. The dome of Hagia Sophia rests on a clever system of curved supports. One reason Hagia Sophia feels so remarkable is the way its dome appears to hover over a square space. The architects used pendentives, curved triangular sections that help transfer the weight of a round dome down to supporting piers. This allowed the dome to rise above open space rather than sit directly on a solid circular wall. Windows around the base of the dome let in light, adding to the sense that the structure is suspended. The engineering was daring and the building needed repairs after earthquakes, especially when an earlier dome partially collapsed. Yet the basic idea endured. Hagia Sophia showed that mathematics, building skill, and spiritual ambition could work together. Its design influenced later architecture in the Byzantine world and far beyond it. Even in silence, its shape seems to explain something about balance. Fact 26. Justinian's law code helped preserve and organize Roman legal tradition. Justinian ordered a major compilation of Roman law that came known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, or body of civil law. It gathered older legal writings, imperial decisions, and teaching materials into a more manageable form. The goal was practical as well as symbolic. A large empire needed judges and officials to know what rules applied. The project also declared that Roman law still mattered, even after centuries of change. The code did not freeze law forever. Later, Byzantine rulers continued to revise and interpret legal material. But Justinian's compilation became enormously influential, especially when it was rediscovered and studied in Western Europe centuries later. It is easy to picture law as dry writing, but legal texts touched daily life, property, inheritance, contracts, disputes, and the rights people could claim. A law book is a map of how a society imagines order. Fact 27. Justinian's generals recovered parts of North Africa from the Vandals. During Justinian's reign, the general Belisarius led an expedition across the Mediterranean to North Africa. There, the Byzantine army defeated the Vandal kingdom and brought the region back under imperial rule. The campaign was swift compared with some later wars, though holding territory was always harder than winning it. North Africa mattered because it was wealthy and productive, with important cities and agricultural land. Recovering it helped Justinian present himself as a restorer of Roman power. But every expansion brought new costs. Armies needed pay, ships needed repair, and provinces needed administrators. The idea of reconquest was grand, but the practical work of governing was endless. In the quiet after a battle, an empire still needed roads, tax records, grain supplies, and local cooperation. Victories could be announced in triumph, but stability had to be built slowly. Fact 28. The war in Italy lasted much longer and cost far more. Justinian also tried to recover Italy from the Ostrogoths. At first, Byzantine forces made striking advances, taking major cities and challenging Gothic rule. But the conflict became long and exhausting. Armies moved back and forth across the peninsula. Cities suffered sieges, shortages, and damage. Italy was eventually brought under Byzantine control, but much of the land had been badly weakened by the years of fighting. This is one of the recurring lessons of imperial history. A map can show a territory changing color in a single year, but people live through the slower reality of war. Farms are left unattended, buildings decay. Families move, taxes rise. The Byzantine recovery of Italy was real, but it came with a heavy burden. The empire had stretched westward, yet its resources were not limitless. Fact 29. Ravenna preserves some of the most famous art from Justinian's age. The Italian city of Ravenna contains churches with extraordinary mosaics from the 6th century. At San Vitale, images of Justinian and Theodora appear in glittering procession scenes. They are not portraits in the modern sense. They are carefully arranged statements about authority, faith, and ceremony. Justinian is shown with clergy and officials. Theodora is shown with attendants and rich textiles. Their figures seem almost weightless against the gold background, yet the political message is solid. The emperor and empress belong at the center of a sacred order. Ravenna's mosaics help us see how Byzantium used art to connect distant provinces to the court at Constantinople. A church in Italy could reflect the style and ambitions of an emperor far across the sea. Art became a quiet way for power to travel. Fact 30. A devastating plague reached the empire during Justinian's reign. In the 6th century, a major outbreak of plague spread through parts of the Mediterranean world, including Constantinople. Modern scholars continue to study its timing, scale, and long-term effects, and not every question has a simple answer. What is clear is That epidemic disease added another layer of strain to an empire already dealing with war and expensive building projects. Cities were especially vulnerable because people, goods, and ships moved constantly through them. Disease does not care about palaces or walls. It can enter with a sailor, a shipment, or a traveler. For Byzantine people, plague raised spiritual questions as well as practical ones. Communities prayed, mourned, and tried to continue. The story reminds us that even a great capital depended on fragile human bodies. Behind every tax list or military campaign were people who could become ill without warning. Fact 31. The empire fought long wars with the Sasanian Persian Empire. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire's great eastern rival was the Sasanian Persian Empire. The two powers competed over borderlands, trade routes, fortresses, and influence in nearby kingdoms. Their wars could be intense and expensive, involving fortified cities, cavalry armies, diplomacy, and shifting alliances. Yet the relationship was not only war. There was also trade, cultural exchange, and mutual awareness. Each empire watched the other closely. In the early 7th century, a particularly destructive conflict pushed Byzantium to the edge. Persian forces captured important territories and even threatened the empire's heartland. The struggle showed how vulnerable the Roman state could become. The Brexit arrived together. But it also set the stage for one of Byzantium's most dramatic recoveries, led by an emperor named Heraclius. Fact 32. Heraclius led the empire through a period of near collapse and recovery. Heraclius became emperor in 610, at a time when the state faced military defeat, financial trouble, and deep uncertainty. The Persian War had gone badly, and important regions were under enemy control. Heraclius reorganized resources and eventually led campaigns that struck back at the Sasanian Empire. His victories helped force a peace that briefly restored much of what had been lost. The recovery was impressive, but it was not the beginning of a calm era. Soon after, new Arab armies emerged from Arabia and transformed the political map of the eastern Mediterranean. Heraclius, therefore, belongs to a turning point. He helped save the empire from one danger, only to see it face another. History can be like that. A solution to one crisis may arrive just before an entirely new challenge appears. Fact 33. The 7th century changed the empire more than almost any other period. By the beginning of the 7th century, Byzantium still looked like a vast Mediterranean empire with wealthy cities and provinces stretching across several regions. By the end of the century, it had lost much of Syria, Egypt, and other territories to the early Islamic caliphate. These losses were profound. They reduced tax revenues, changed trade patterns, and altered the empire's relationship with the wider Mediterranean. Yet the state did not vanish. It became more compact, more defensive, and more focused on Anatolia, the Balkans, and Constantinople itself. This was not simply decline. It was transformation. The empire learned new ways to organize soldiers, resources, and local administration. The Byzantine world of later centuries grew from this hard adaptation. Like a tree after a storm, it had fewer branches in some directions, but it was still alive. Fact 34. The theme system helped link local defense with provincial life. Over time, the empire developed military and administrative districts, commonly called themes. The precise beginnings and details of the system are still debated by historians, but its broad purpose was clear. In a more threatened world, local regions needed soldiers, commanders, and resources that could respond to danger quickly. Themes helped organize defense across Anatolia and other areas. Soldiers might receive land or support connected to their service, though arrangements changed over time and were not identical everywhere. The system was not a magic answer. It evolved, and later emperors adjusted it as circumstances changed. But it helped Byzantium survive after the great losses of the 7th century. Instead of relying only on distant armies, the empire built a more local framework of resilience. Defense became part of the landscape, not just a decision made in a palace. Fact 35. Greek fire became one of the empire's most feared naval weapons. Byzantine writers and later observers described a mysterious incendiary weapon, often called Greek fire. It could be projected from ships, and was especially frightening in naval combat because it was said to keep burning even on water. The exact formula was a closely guarded secret and has been lost. That secrecy has made Greek fire famous ever since. What matters historically is that the empire had specialized military technology and knew how to use it in defense of Constantinople and its sea lanes. The weapon was not used everywhere, and it did not guarantee victory, but it became part of the city's reputation. Imagine enemy ships approaching a fortified harbor at night, then seeing streams of flame across the water. Such a sight could change morale before a battle had even fully begun. Technology can be as psychological as it is physical. Fact 36. Constantinople survived several major sieges by combining walls, ships, and planning. The capital faced repeated threats over the centuries. Some attackers came by land, others came by sea. Some tried both. Constantinople survived many of these sieges because its defenses worked together. The land walls slowed armies. The harbors could be protected with chains. The navy could attack or supply the city. Cisterns and stores helped residents endure periods of isolation. Diplomacy also mattered. The empire sometimes bought time, made alliances, or encouraged divisions among enemies. A city does not survive for centuries by relying on one wall or one weapon alone. It survives through preparation, maintenance, patience, and luck. For the people inside, a siege would have been frightening and exhausting. Yet, the capital's long record of survival gave it a powerful aura. It seemed, for many generations, like a city built to resist the end of the world. Fact 37. Iconoclasm was a long dispute over sacred images. During the 8th and 9th centuries, the Byzantine world experienced major conflicts over religious images, especially icons. Some people believed that images of Christ, the Virgin and saints should be honored as meaningful aids to devotion. Others worried that such practices could become a form of improper worship. The debates involved theology, politics, imperial authority, monastic communities, and public emotion. Images were removed or destroyed in some places, while their defenders argued for their restoration. The exact causes and experiences of iconoclasm were complex, and historians still examine the limited and often partisan sources. What is certain is that the question mattered deeply. It was not merely about art. It concerned how invisible holiness could or could not be represented in the visible world. The controversy lasted generations because people believed their answer touched the heart of faith itself. Fact 38. The restoration of icons is remembered as the triumph of orthodoxy. In 43 the veneration of icons was formally restored in Constantinople. The event is remembered in the Orthodox Church as the triumph of orthodoxy and is still commemorated in worship. The restoration did not erase the memory of conflict, but it helped shape the visual character of Eastern Christian art for centuries to come. Icons again became central in churches, homes, processions, and private devotion. A painted panel could be carried, kissed, lit with a lamp, or placed in a quiet corner of a house. To modern eyes, an icon may appear still and formal. To many Byzantine worshippers, it was a point of presence and attention, a way of focusing prayer. The return of icons was therefore not simply the return of pictures. It was the return of a whole visual language of faith. Fact 39. Missionaries from the Byzantine world helped spread Christianity and literacy among Slavic peoples. In the 9th century, two brothers from Thessaloniki, Cyril and Methodius, became famous for their missionary work among Slavic-speaking communities. They helped develop forms of written language suitable for translating Christian texts and teaching worship. Their work became important in the cultural history of Central and Eastern Europe. The alphabet, now called Cyrillic, was developed later by their followers, but it carries their name in memory. This is one of Byzantium's quieter legacies. Influence did not move only through armies or trade. It also moved through language, books, liturgy, and teachers willing to learn how other people spoke. A translated prayer or gospel could travel farther than a soldier. Over generations, Byzantine religious and literary traditions became woven into the histories of many neighboring societies. Fact 40. Basil I began a dynasty that ruled for nearly 2 centuries. Basil I came to power in 867 and founded the Macedonian dynasty, a line of emperors under whom Byzantium often regained strength. The dynasty's history was not peaceful from beginning to end, and succession could still be complicated. Yet, the period saw military successes, renewed learning, legal revision, and artistic development. Historians sometimes use the phrase Macedonian Renaissance for the cultural revival associated with parts of this era. The term should not make us imagine simple rebirth after darkness. Byzantine culture had never stopped changing or creating. Still, there was a clear growth in the copying of classical texts, court scholarship, and artistic production. The empire was once again confident enough to look outward, rebuild institutions, and celebrate its Roman and Greek inheritance in new forms. Fact 41. Basil II became famous for expanding and consolidating Byzantine power. Basil II ruled for much of the late 10th and early 11th centuries, from 976 to 1025. His long reign is often remembered as a high point of Byzantine military strength. He fought powerful rivals, especially in the Balkans, and eventually brought Bulgaria under imperial control. His nickname in later tradition, the Bulgar Slayer, reflects the intensity of those conflicts, though the human cost should never be forgotten. Basil also worked to limit the power of some wealthy aristocrats and strengthen imperial finances. When he died, the empire was larger and more secure than it had been for generations. Yet, no ruler can guarantee the future forever. The system Basil left behind depended on capable successors and stable institutions. His reign shows both what focused leadership can accomplish and how quickly hard-won balance can be tested after a strong ruler is gone. Fact 42. The Varangian Guard served as an elite unit close to the emperor. The Varangian Guard became one of the most famous military formations in Byzantium. Its members often came from northern Europe, including Scandinavia and later Anglo-Saxon England. They were known for carrying large axes and for serving as a personal guard to the emperor. Foreign guards could be valued because they were thought to be less tied to local political factions, though in reality every military group had its own interests and loyalties. The presence of Varangians in Constantinople also reminds us how connected the medieval world could be. A person from the far north might travel rivers and seas, enter Byzantine service, see the splendor of the capital, and send stories home. Norse sagas later remembered the city as Miklagard, the great city. To a traveler from a small northern settlement, Constantinople may have seemed almost impossible to describe. Fact 43. Byzantine law continued to be revised after Justinian. Justinian's legal compilation did not end the work of law. Later emperors and scholars updated, shortened, translated, and reorganized legal materials for new conditions. The Ecloga in the 8th century and the Basilica in the 9th and 10th centuries are examples of this continuing legal activity. As Greek became more central, legal texts were increasingly made accessible in Greek rather than only in Latin. This mattered because law has to be usable. A judge, official, landowner, widow, merchant, or soldier needed rules that could be understood and applied. Byzantine law preserved Roman ideas, but it also reflected Christian values and changing social realities. It was a living tradition, not a museum shelf. In that sense, the empire carried Rome forward not by refusing change, but by continually adjusting inherited systems to a new age. Fact 44. Byzantine hospitals developed organized forms of care. The Byzantine world included institutions that offered medical care, shelter, and charity. Some were connected to churches, monasteries, or wealthy patrons. Hospitals, often called xenones, could provide beds, staff, and treatment for sick people, travelers, and the poor. Their exact organization varied by place and time, but they show that care for illness could be organized beyond the household. Medical knowledge came from many sources, including ancient Greek writings, practical experience, and traditions shared across the Mediterranean. Physicians, nurses, attendants, and religious caregivers all had roles to play. A Byzantine hospital was not modern in every way, but it was more than a simple place to wait and hope. It was an institution designed for sustained care. In a city full of trade and movement, that kind of organized compassion mattered. Fact 45. The empire connected Europe, Asia, and Africa through trade. Byzantine merchants traded in silk, spices, metals, glass wine, grain, wax, fur, ivory, and countless other goods. Constantinople sat at the center of routes that linked the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, the Caucasus, the Near East, and regions farther away. Trade brought wealth, but it also brought ideas, languages, artistic styles, and religious encounters. A merchant might hear several languages in a single market day. A foreign ambassador might arrive with gifts that looked unfamiliar even to a wealthy court. The empire tried to regulate and benefit from this commerce, especially in the capital. Customs duties, official workshops, and market rules all mattered. Yet trade was never fully controlled. People found routes, made connections, and carried things beyond the reach of any one ruler. Commerce was one of the soft forces that made Byzantium a meeting place for worlds. Fact 40. Constantinople was one of the largest cities in medieval Europe. Population estimates for ancient and medieval cities are always uncertain, but Constantinople was undeniably enormous by the standards of its time. It had dense neighborhoods, imperial buildings, churches, markets, workshops, ports, gardens, cisterns, and suburbs. Its residents included officials, artisans, sailors, monks, merchants, soldiers, servants, visitors, and people from many regions. Large cities are complicated organisms. They need food, water, waste removal, security, work, and constant repair. They can be beautiful and exhausting at the same time. Constantinople's size helped make it rich and influential, but it also made it vulnerable to disease, fire, crowd unrest, and shortages. Still, for a traveler arriving by sea, the city must have looked astonishing. It rose from the water as a dense landscape of human effort, built and rebuilt across generations. Fact 47. Byzantine churches used light as part of their design. In many Byzantine churches, light was not only practical, it was part of the spiritual experience of the building. Windows placed high in domes and walls could send shafts of daylight across gold mosaics. Oil lamps added warmer, moving points of brightness. Marble surfaces reflected light softly. A visitor might enter from a narrow street and step into a space that felt larger, higher and more luminous than expected. Architects and artists used this contrast to guide attention upward and inward. The effect was not meant to be theatrical in the modern sense. It was meant to support prayer and awe. In a world without electric lighting, the gradual shift from shadow to glow would have been especially powerful. Byzantine architecture often asked people to slow down, look carefully, and sense that ordinary space had become something more. Fact 48. Icons were used in homes as well as churches. Icons were not limited to grand public buildings. Many Byzantine households kept religious images in private spaces. A small panel might be placed near a lamp, carried during travel, or handed down within a family. People could pray before an icon during illness, danger, grief, or gratitude. The image did not replace the person it represented. Rather, of its defender, it helped direct attention toward the holy figure beyond the painted surface. The practice gave religion a close, domestic presence. A church offered grandeur, chanting, incense, and community. An icon at home offered something quieter, a familiar face in a familiar room. This is one reason images mattered so deeply in Byzantine life. They were not only public art, they were part of memory, routine, and the small moments when people needed comfort. Fact 49. Byzantine artists were skilled in ivory, enamel, metalwork, and textiles. Mosaics are famous, but Byzantine art took many forms. Craftspeople carved ivory panels, shaped silver vessels, worked gold into jewelry, set colored glass into enamel, painted manuscripts, and wove elaborate fabrics. Some objects were made for churches. Others were used in palaces, homes, or diplomatic exchanges. The finest pieces could travel far from Constantinople, carrying the empire's visual style into other lands. A small ivory carving could show extraordinary detail. A gold enamel icon could make a sacred figure glow in the hand. These objects remind us that Byzantine art was not only monumental, it could be intimate, portable, and personal. Skilled craft requires quiet concentration. A goldsmith, weaver, or carver had to repeat careful movements again and again. In each object, there is a trace of time, hours spent shaping a material until it became something lasting. Fact 50. Mount Athos became an important center of Orthodox monastic life. On a mountainous peninsula in northern Greece, Mount Athos developed into one of the great centers of Orthodox monasticism. Its monasteries attracted monks from across the Byzantine world and beyond. The landscape itself helped create a sense of separation from ordinary political life. Steep slopes, forests, sea views, and remote paths made the region feel suited to prayer and contemplation. Monasteries on Athos accumulated libraries, icons, relics, and lands, while also preserving traditions of worship and learning. The community was not isolated from the empire. Emperors and wealthy patrons supported it, and its influence could reach far beyond its shores. But the daily monastic rhythm remained built around prayer, labor, meals, reading, and silence. In the long Byzantine world, places like Athos offered a different measure of time, one marked less by politics than by the hours of worship. Fact 51. Most Byzantine people lived close to the land. The splendor of Constantinople can make us forget that much of the empire was rural. Villages, farms, vineyards, orchards, fields, and grazing lands supported the wider population. Farmers grew wheat, barley, grapes, olives, and other crops suited to local climates. Their lives were shaped by seasons, rainfall, taxes, landlords, military demands, and the risk of bad harvests. Rural people were not simply background figures in history. Their labor fed cities, paid revenue, and made armies possible. A successful harvest could steady an entire region. A failed one could lead to hunger, debt, migration, or unrest. The empire's grand ceremonies depended on ordinary agricultural work. Somewhere far from the palace, a farmer mending a wall or gathering olives was helping sustain the same state that minted gold coins and built great churches. Fact 52. The Byzantine calendar was filled with saints' days and festivals. Time in the Byzantine Empire was measured in more ways than one. There were months, tax years, military seasons, and imperial anniversaries. There were also the liturgical cycles of the church: feasts, fasts, saints' commemorations, and holy days. These observances shaped work, travel, meals, and public ceremony. A calendar was not merely a way to count days. It was a way to give days different meanings. One day might be associated with a martyr. Another might begin a period of fasting. Another might bring a procession, a market, or a family gathering. In this rhythm, the year became a pattern of remembered stories. Even people who could not read a written calendar could know the cycle through church services, customs, and repeated habits. The passing of time was something heard and felt as much as it was counted. Fact 53. Bread, wine, olives, and fish were common parts of Byzantine food culture. What people ate depended on wealth, region, season, and access to markets. Yet, across much of the Byzantine world, bread was fundamental. Wheat bread was especially valued where it was available, though other grains were also eaten. Wine and olive oil were important in many regions. Fish, vegetables, legumes, fruit, cheese, and herbs appeared in different combinations. Meat was more occasional for many people, and church fasts affected what could be eaten on certain days. Food was both ordinary and symbolic. Bread belonged to daily meals and to religious ritual. Wine could be traded, celebrated, or used in worship. Olive oil lit lamps as well as flavored food. A simple meal carried the marks of climate, agriculture, faith, and trade. In a home at dusk, supper might be modest, but it linked a family to the fields, markets, and traditions around them. Fact 54. Women could own property and use legal rights, though society remained unequal. Byzantine women did not live outside the law. They could inherit property, make wills, enter certain contracts, and in some circumstances control wealth. Widows, especially, could hold important family responsibilities. Yet legal rights did not erase social limits. Expectations about marriage, modesty, household roles, and public presence varied by class, place, and time. Elite women could influence court politics, while many other women worked in homes, shops, farms, workshops, or religious communities. It is important not to imagine a single Byzantine woman. There were empresses, nuns, merchants, servants, mothers, landowners, artisans, and pilgrims. Their lives were shaped by very different resources and risks. The law gives us one window into their world, but daily life gives us another. Between those windows lies a wide range of real human experience. Fact 55. Eunuchs held important roles in Byzantine court and administration. Eunuchs were present in many parts of Byzantine society, especially in palace service, administration, and church life. Some held high office, commanded armies, advised emperors, or served in trusted household positions. Their roles can seem unfamiliar today, but in the Byzantine court they were part of the political landscape. Because they could not found conventional hereditary dynasties, rulers sometimes considered them useful in positions requiring personal loyalty, though no group is ever free from ambition or rivalry. Their lives could be marked by privilege, constraint, opportunity, and stigma in different proportions. Byzantine sources sometimes praise them and sometimes mock them, revealing the prejudices of the writers we and presents. Looking at their roles helps us see that the empire's social structure was more varied than a simple picture of emperors, soldiers, and peasants. Court life contained many different paths to influence. Fact 56. Byzantine succession was often less predictable than people imagine. The empire had dynasties, but it did not follow a strict rule that the eldest son always inherited without question. Emperors could name co-rulers, adopt heirs, marry into legitimacy, or be challenged by generals and relatives. Some rose from humble backgrounds. Others were born into palace life. A ruler who lost the support of the army, court, church, or capital could find his position suddenly fragile. This unpredictability made public ceremony even more important. Crowns, processions, acclamations, and portraits helped show that a ruler's authority was legitimate. But beneath the ceremony, politics remained personal and practical. Who controlled the guards? Who had money? Who could persuade officials? Who had the backing of the city? The Byzantine throne was grand, but it was never simply a chair waiting patiently for one family forever. Fact 57. The tensions between Rome and Constantinople grew over many centuries. The churches of Rome and Constantinople shared much of early Christian history, but differences in language, authority, practice, and political experience gradually increased. The event often called the Great Schism of 1054 is useful as a marker, but it was not a single clean moment when all ties suddenly vanished. The separation developed over a long time and was shaped by later conflicts as well. Greek-speaking Christians in the East and Latin-speaking Christians in the West continued to have connections, but disagreements became more serious. The question of papal authority was especially important. So were theological wording, liturgical customs, and the pressures created by changing political worlds. The story is not simply one of two sides deciding to disagree. It is a long story of communities growing apart, while still remembering that they had once belonged to a wider shared tradition. Fact 58. The defeat at Manzikert changed the empire's position in Anatolia. In 1071, Byzantine forces suffered a major defeat against the Seljuk Turks at the Battle of Manzikert. The battle itself was serious, but the political confusion that followed was just as important. Rival claimants, civil conflict, and weakened control made it harder for the empire to defend Anatolia effectively. Over time, Turkish powers established themselves in areas that had long been central to Byzantine in military strength and agricultural wealth. This did not mean that all of Anatolia was lost overnight. History rarely moves that neatly, but Manzikert became a symbol of a broader shift. The empire's eastern heartland was no longer secure in the way it had been. A loss on one battlefield opened into a long period of changing settlement, authority, and cultural contact. Maps began to look different, and so did the empire's future. Fact 59. Alexios I Komnenos helped stabilize the empire after a difficult period. Alexios the Fisted became emperor in 1081, when Byzantium faced danger from several directions. The empire had lost ground in Anatolia, faced pressure in the Balkans, and had financial problems. Alexios worked through diplomacy, military reform, alliances, and careful political maneuvering to strengthen the state. His reign was not easy, but it began what historians often call the Komnenian Restoration. He also played a complicated role in the events surrounding the First Crusade. Western armies arriving in the East were both potential allies and potential sources of trouble. Alexios needed their help against Turkish powers, but he also needed to protect Byzantine interests. His career shows the skill required of a medieval emperor. Survival did not depend only on winning battles. It depended on knowing when to negotiate, when to wait, and when to use one rival to balance another. Fact 60. The First Crusade brought Western armies through Byzantine territory. When the First Crusade began, at the end of the 11th century, large groups of Western European soldiers and pilgrims moved toward the Eastern Mediterranean. Many passed through or near Byzantine lands, and some gathered around Constantinople. For the empire, this was both an opportunity and a challenge. The Crusaders could fight enemies who also threatened Byzantium, but they had their own leaders, goals, and expectations. Alexios I tried to manage their passage and secure promises that former Byzantine territories would be returned if recovered. Cooperation sometimes worked. At other times, suspicion and misunderstanding grew. The encounter brought Latin Western Europeans and Greek-speaking Byzantines into closer contact, but not always into greater trust. It was a reminder that people who share a religion can still have very different political interests and cultural habits. Fact 61. Byzantium and the Crusader states sometimes cooperated and sometimes competed. After the First Crusade, new Crusader states appeared in the Eastern Mediterranean. Their existence changed the region's balance of power. Byzantine emperors sometimes made alliances with Crusader rulers against common enemies. At other times, they fought over cities, trade routes, and claims of authority. The relationship was never simple because each side had its own needs. The Byzantines wanted security and the recovery of influence in former territories. The Crusader states wanted survival, land, and support from the West. Diplomacy could involve marriages, gifts, titles, religious promises, and military agreements. On the ground, people also traded, traveled, and learned from one another. History often remembers the sharpest conflicts, but daily contact could be more mixed. A port city might contain merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, interpreters, and families from many backgrounds, all sharing the same streets for a time. Fact 62. Italian merchant cities gained important privileges in Byzantine trade. Venice, Genoa, Pisa, and other Italian maritime powers became increasingly important in the commerce of the Eastern Mediterranean. Byzantine emperors sometimes granted them trading privileges in exchange for naval assistance or political support. These arrangements could be useful in the short term, especially when the empire needed ships. But they also gave foreign merchants growing influence inside Constantinople and other ports. Special quarters, tax exemptions, and commercial advantages could create resentment among local traders. The story shows how economic choices can shape political futures. A privilege granted during a crisis may continue long after the crisis has passed. Italian merchants brought goods, connections, and naval skill. They also became rivals whose interests did not always match those of the empire. Trade made Constantinople rich, but it also made the city part of competitions it could not fully control. Fact 63. The Komnenian era brought a period of recovery and cultural energy. And the Komnenian dynasty, especially from the late 11th through the 12th century, helped the empire regain some stability after the shocks of the previous century. Emperors such as Alexios I, John II, and Manuel I strengthened the army, used diplomacy actively, and restored influence in parts of the Balkans and Anatolia. The empire was not as large as it had been under Justinian or Basil II, but it was again a significant power. Court culture also flourished. Scholars wrote histories, artists created new works, and trade remained lively. The period was not free from danger, and imperial resources were often stretched thin. Still, it showed Byzantium's ability to recover. The empire had a long habit of adjusting after loss. The Komnenian era was one of those moments when the adjustment worked well enough to create a new season of confidence. Fact 64. Manuel I Komnenos looked toward both east and west. Manuel ruled from 1143 to 1180 and was one of the most ambitious Komnenian emperors. He was deeply involved in the politics of the Mediterranean world, dealing with Western rulers, Crusader states, Balkan powers, and neighbors in Anatolia. His court was open to many influences, and he appears in sources as a ruler, interested in display, diplomacy, and active military leadership. Manuel's reign shows how wide Byzantine horizons could be. The empire was not turned inward. It watched events from Italy to Syria and tried to shape them. Yet, such involvement was costly. Alliances had to be maintained, armies supplied, and rivals managed. Manuel's world was dazzling but fragile, like a silk banner in a strong wind. After his death, the balance he had maintained became harder to preserve. Fact 65. The Fourth Crusade captured Constantinople in 1204. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade, originally directed toward the Holy Land, turned against Constantinople and captured the city. The sack was one of the most traumatic events in Byzantine history. Churches, palaces, libraries, and homes were looted. Works of art and relics were carried away. The Latin conquerors established their own rule in the city, while Byzantine political life continued in several successor states elsewhere. The event shattered assumptions that Constantinople's walls and prestige could always protect it. It also deepened the divide between Greek Orthodox and Latin Christian worlds. The capture of 1204 was not just a change of rulers. It was a rupture in memory. A city that had survived so many external enemies had been taken by fellow Christians. For generations, Byzantines remembered the wound with anger and sorrow. Fact 66. The Latin occupation did not erase Byzantine political life. After 1204, the Byzantine Empire did not simply disappear. Greek-speaking rulers established successor states, most importantly at Nicaea in western Anatolia, as well as in Epirus and Trebizond. These states preserved Byzantine institutions, religious traditions, and hopes of recovering Constantinople. The Empire of Nicaea became especially important because it held a strong claim to continue the Roman imperial tradition. Its rulers built armies, maintained diplomacy, and supported a court in exile. The Latin Empire in Constantinople, meanwhile, struggled with limited resources and rival interests. This period shows states can survive even when their capital is lost. Identity can move. Administration can be rebuilt elsewhere. A throne is not only a room or a building. It is also a network of people, laws, ceremonies, and beliefs that can travel with those who keep them alive. Fact 67. Trebizond became a long-lasting Byzantine successor state on the Black Sea. The Empire of Trebizond was founded after the events of 1204 and lasted for centuries on the southeastern coast of the Black Sea. Its capital, Trebizond, was a wealthy and strategically placed port, connected to trade routes from Anatolia, the Caucasus, Persia, and beyond. The rulers of Trebizond claimed Byzantine imperial traditions. Though their state was separate from the empire, later restored in Constantinople, the city became known for its mountain setting, sea trade, churches, and court culture. It is a reminder that Byzantine history was never only the story of one capital. The empire's traditions spread through many regions, and after political fragmentation, several centers carried them forward. But wherefore? E4. A map of Byzantium is not a single unbroken shape. It is often a shifting pattern of connected places, each preserving part of a larger memory. Fact 68. Epirus was another important center of Byzantine power after 1204. The despotate of Epirus emerged in western Greece and the Balkans. After the fall of Constantinople to the Fourth Crusade, its rulers also claimed to represent Byzantine authority and competed with Nicaea for influence and legitimacy. For a time, Epirus expanded and seemed capable of recovering the capital itself. But medieval politics rarely followed a simple path. Alliances changed, military defeats mattered, and rival states gained or lost ground. The existence of Epirus shows how fragmented Byzantine power became after 1204. Yet, fragmentation did not mean cultural emptiness. Courts, churches, local elites, merchants, and communities continued their lives. The Byzantine world was divided, but it was still productive, connected, and full of people who understood their institutions as part of a Roman inheritance. Fact 69. In 1261, Constantinople was recovered for the Byzantines. In 1261, forces connected to the Empire of Nicaea retook Constantinople from the Latin rulers. Michael VIII Palaiologos entered the city and restored Byzantine rule there. The recovery was a major symbolic victory. After nearly 6 decades, the old capital was once again in Greek-Byzantine hands. But the city was damaged and poorer than it had been before 1204. The empire that returned was not the same great power of earlier centuries. Its territory was smaller, its finances weaker, and its rivals stronger. Still, the recovery mattered deeply. It showed that Constantinople remained more than a place on a map. It was the emotional and ceremonial heart of the Roman-Byzantine idea. Reclaiming it allowed the empire to resume its story, even though the next chapters would be written under growing pressure. Fact 70. The restored city required years of rebuilding. After 1261, Byzantine rulers worked to repair Constantinople's churches, walls, public buildings, and neighborhoods. Many places had suffered from neglect, looting, or changed use during the Latin occupation. Rebuilding was not only practical, it was a statement that the city had returned to its rightful place in the Byzantine imagination. Restored mosaics, repaired monasteries, and renewed ceremonies helped create a sense of continuity with the past. But reconstruction was expensive, and the empire did not have the same resources it once possessed. Some areas remained less populated or less prosperous than before. This gives the later Byzantine capital a particular feeling in history: proud, beautiful, and determined, yet aware of its limits. A city can be rebuilt stone by stone, but memory carries the scars of what happened before. Fact 71. The Palaiologan period produced a final flowering of Byzantine art. The period after the recovery of Constantinople is often called the Palaiologan era, after the dynasty that ruled much of the restored empire. Despite political weakness and territorial loss, art and scholarship experienced a notable renewal. Church frescoes and mosaics became more expressive and detailed. Figures could appear more human, emotional, and connected to one another than in some earlier styles. Scholars read, copied, and commented on classical Greek texts. This is another one of Byzantium's paradoxes. The empire was shrinking, but parts of its culture were flowering. Political power and artistic vitality do not always rise and fall together. In quiet churches, painters continued to work. In libraries, readers continued to study. In a time of uncertainty, creativity became one way of holding on to meaning. Fact 72. Hesychasm became an important spiritual movement in late Byzantium. In the 14th century, a form of contemplative prayer known as hesychasm became especially influential in the Orthodox world. The word is connected to stillness or quiet. Practitioners emphasized inner prayer, spiritual attention, and the repeated invocation sometimes called the Jesus Prayer. The movement also became part of theological debate, especially through the writings of Gregory Palamas. These debates could be complex, but at their heart was a question about how human beings might experience divine presence. Hesychasm reminds us that Byzantium was not only a world of public ceremony and imperial display, it was also a world of inward practice, and a person could seek holiness not by traveling anywhere grand, but by sitting quietly, regulating the mind, and returning attention to prayer. In that sense, some Byzantine spirituality feels very close to the restful mood of a late night. Fact 73. The later empire lived beside powerful Balkan and Anatolian neighbors. After 1261, Byzantium had to navigate a crowded political landscape. Serbian, Bulgarian, Venetian, Genoese, Turkish, and other powers all shaped the region. The empire could no longer command the same resources as before, so diplomacy became even more important. Marriages, treaties, tribute, trade agreements, church politics, and temporary alliances all mattered. A smaller state can survive for a long time if it understands the rivalries around it. Byzantine rulers often tried to balance one threat against another, but this strategy had limits, especially as the Ottoman state expanded in Anatolia and the Balkans. The late empire was not simply waiting passively for an ending. It was actively negotiating, repairing, pleading, trading, and fighting. Its people lived in a world where the future was uncertain, but daily life still continued inside the walls. Fact 74. The Ottoman state rose gradually as a major Byzantine rival. The Ottomans began as one of several Turkish powers in Anatolia, but over time they expanded into a larger and more organized state. They crossed into Europe, took key territories in the Balkans, and gradually surrounded Constantinople. Byzantine emperors sometimes made alliances with Ottoman rulers, sometimes fought them, sometimes became dependent on their support against other rivals. This could seem contradictory, but it reflected the difficult choices of a weakened empire. The Ottomans were not an inevitable force of nature. Their rise involved leadership, military organization, diplomacy, local alliances, and opportunities created by the fragmentation of their neighbors. As their power grew, the old Byzantine capital became increasingly isolated. Yet, the city remained symbolically important to everyone around it. Constantinople was still a prize even when its empire had become small. Fact 75. The final siege of Constantinople took place in 1453. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire laid siege to Constantinople. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI led the city's defense, with a small force that included Byzantine residents and foreign allies. The defenders relied on the famous walls, but the Ottoman army had large numbers, naval power, and heavy artillery. The siege lasted for weeks. It was a moment of immense tension for everyone inside the city. Churches held services, people repaired defenses. Soldiers watched the walls. Families waited. On the 29th of May, Ottoman forces broke through after sustained attacks, and Constantinople fell. The event marked the end of the Byzantine Empire as a political state. But endings in history are rarely total. Buildings, books, people, customs, and faiths continued into the worlds that followed. Fact 76. Constantine XI became the last Byzantine emperor. Constantine XI, Palaiologos, was the final emperor to rule in Constantinople. He knew the city's situation was desperate, yet he remained during the final siege rather than leaving for safety. Later, traditions remembered him as a tragic and courageous figure. Some stories have, but his final moments became legendary, and historians cannot confirm every detail. What is certain is that his death during the fall of the city gave later generations a powerful symbol of an empire's last stand. It is easy to turn such figures into statues in the mind, but Constantine was also a person living under enormous pressure, trying to hold together a shrinking state with limited resources. His story invites compassion as much as admiration. The end of an empire is never only about a date. It is also about the people who had to live through its final morning. Fact 77. Hagia Sophia entered a new chapter after 1453. After the Ottoman conquest, Hagia Sophia was converted from a church into a mosque. Over the centuries that followed, it was repaired, adapted, and enriched with new elements, including minarets and Islamic calligraphy. Its history did not stop with Byzantium. Instead, the building became part of the Ottoman world, and later the modern history of Istanbul. This longer story matters because monuments are not frozen in one moment. They can carry several histories at once. Hagia Sophia remains connected to Byzantine architecture and Christian worship, but it also belongs to centuries of Islamic prayer and Ottoman patronage. Looking at it only through one period would miss the layers that make it so extraordinary. The building is a reminder that history often continues in the same place even when political and religious worlds change around it. Fact 78. The fall of Constantinople did not erase Byzantine learning. After 1453, Greek scholars, manuscripts, artists, clergy, and families continued to move through the Mediterranean world. Some had left earlier, especially after the fall of 1204. Others found new homes in Italian cities, Ottoman lands, Orthodox states, and elsewhere. Their movement helped carry Byzantine and classical Greek learning into new settings. It is sometimes said too simply that Byzantine scholars caused the Renaissance. The reality is more complicated. Italian humanism had many roots, and classical learning had already been growing in the West. But the arrival of Greek texts and teachers did matter. They added new voices, new manuscripts, and deeper access to ancient language and philosophy. A library can survive even when capital falls. A teacher can carry a whole tradition in memory from one city to another. Fact 79. Orthodox Christianity remains one of Byzantium's strongest living legacies. The Byzantine Empire ended as a state, but the Orthodox Christian traditions shaped within and around it continued. Churches in Greece, the Balkans, Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, the Middle East, and beyond inherited forms of worship, music, theology, icon painting, and monastic life that were deeply connected to Byzantium. The legacy is living, not merely historical. People still chant hymns with roots in Byzantine practice. Icons are still painted and prayed before. Monasteries still follow rhythms that would be recognizable to many medieval monks. Of course, living traditions change as communities change, but continuity remains real. This is one reason Byzantium matters. It is not only a vanished empire in a textbook, it is also a source of practices, languages, art, and devotion that continue to shape communities today. Fact 80. The Cyrillic alphabet preserves a memory of Byzantine cultural influence. The alphabet used today for languages such as Russian, Bulgarian, Serbian, Ukrainian, and others is called Cyrillic in honor of Cyril, one of the missionary brothers associated with the Byzantine world. The alphabet itself was developed by followers in the wider Slavic Christian tradition, not simply created by Cyril alone. Still, the name preserves a memory of how Byzantine religious and literary culture traveled north and east. Writing systems are powerful cultural tools. They make it possible to translate prayers, laws, stories, letters, and songs into languages people can understand. In this way, an imperial culture can influence distant lands without conquering them. The spread of literacy and worship in local languages became one of Byzantium's most lasting gifts. A set of letters can travel farther than any army and last longer than any fortress. Fact 81. Roman law reached later Europe, partly through Byzantine preservation. The legal traditions organized under Justinian and developed in Byzantium had a long afterlife. In medieval and early modern Europe, scholars studied Roman law and used it in universities, courts, and political thought. This influence did not pass in a straight line, and different regions adopted legal ideas in different ways. But the preservation and compilation of Roman legal texts in the Byzantine world mattered greatly. Without such work, later readers would have had a much thinner record of ancient law. The legacy is another example of quiet transmission. and an official in Constantinople may have copied a legal passage simply because it was needed for his own time. Centuries later, a scholar somewhere else could read that same passage and use it to imagine law in a new way. A document can cross time as surely as a ship crosses a sea. Fact 82. Byzantine architecture influenced places far beyond Constantinople. The architectural ideas developed in Byzantine churches traveled widely. Domes, central plans, mosaics, marble decoration, and particular ways of shaping sacred space appeared across the Balkans, the Eastern Mediterranean, Italy, the Caucasus, and beyond. Later, Islamic architects also worked in a world where Byzantine buildings, craftspeople, and visual traditions were present. If influence does not mean copying one thing exactly, it means that builders see a possibility and adapt it to new needs. A dome can become part of another tradition. A mosaic technique can be used for a different message. A church plan can inspire a building in another land. Byzantium's architecture lasted because it offered practical and beautiful answers to the question of how a building can make people feel gathered, sheltered, and lifted upward at the same time. Fact 83. The empire was culturally diverse, not purely Greek or purely Roman. The Byzantine Empire included people who spoke Greek, Armenian, Syriac, Coptic, Latin, Slavic languages, Arabic, and many others. Its territories stretched at different times across parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. People could share imperial rule without sharing the same language, food, local customs, or exact form of Christianity. Some communities lived near the capital. Others lived in mountain villages, desert towns, island ports, or border fortresses. The empire tried to govern this diversity, sometimes successfully and sometimes harshly. Its history includes cooperation, conversion, debate, inequality, and conflict. Remembering diversity helps us avoid imagining Byzantium as one uniform golden world. It was a wide and changing society. Its richness came partly from the meeting of many traditions, even when those meetings were difficult. Fact 84. The city of Constantinople was always more than one culture at once. Constantinople was a Christian imperial capital, but it was also a commercial city open to the sea. Merchants and visitors brought languages, dress, food, religious objects, and stories from far away. Foreign communities could live in or near the city under different arrangements. Diplomats arrived from neighboring kingdoms and distant powers. Sailors carried rumors before official messages had time to arrive. The city was therefore not sealed inside its walls. Its walls protected it, but its harbors opened it to the world. This mixture helps explain why Constantinople was so important. It was not just the center of one empire. It was a hinge between regions. People came there to buy, sell, pray, petition, serve, learn, negotiate, or simply pass through. A place with that much movement develops its own rhythm, quick in the market and slow in the shadow of a church. Fact 85. Byzantine coins help historians trace rulers, trade, and belief. Coins are among the most useful surviving objects from the Byzantine world. They often carry names, titles, portraits, crosses, images of Christ, or symbols of imperial authority. Because coins were made in large numbers and travelled widely, they can be found far from where they were minted. A coin discovered in a port, village, or buried hoard may tell historians about trade routes, political control, or economic habits. Changes in weight, metal content, and design can also reveal periods of stability or stress. A gold solidus, a silver coin, or a copper piece from a market stall each has a different story. These objects were meant to be used, not displayed, in museums. Someone once counted them, saved them, spent them, or lost them. In that small human contact, the distant empire becomes easier to imagine. Fact 86. Lead seals reveal the hidden work of Byzantine administration. When a document itself is lost, its lead seal can sometimes remain. That little piece of metal may preserve the name and office of a person who otherwise would be almost unknown. Thousands of such seals have been studied by historians and archaeologists. They show the range of Byzantine administration. Military commanders, tax officials, judges, bishops, palace servants, and local authorities. They also show how often people moved information through the empire. A sealed letter might concern an order, a shipment, a dispute, or a request. The survival of these seals is a quiet gift from the past. They are not dramatic monuments, but they reveal the machinery of government. Empires are held together by messages as much as by walls. Someone had to write the order. Someone had to carry it. And someone had to recognize the seal when it arrived. Fact 87. Manuscripts show that Byzantine readers cared about both sacred and ancient texts. Byzantine libraries and scriptoria preserved biblical books, writings of church fathers, hymns, saints' lives, histories, and legal works. They also copied texts by authors such as Homer, Plato, Aristotle, and many others from the classical Greek tradition. Byzantine readers did not treat all ancient literature in the same way, and some works were valued more than others. But the culture of copying and commentary helped preserve a remarkable range of material. A manuscript might contain prayers on one page and notes from a schoolmaster on another. It might be carefully illuminated or heavily used and repaired. Every surviving book has its own journey. It passed through hands, shelves, wars, migrations, and accidents. When we read an ancient Greek text today, we are often reading something that survived in part because Byzantine scribes and readers thought it was worth keeping. Fact 88. Historical sources about Byzantium have their own biases and blind spots. Much of what we know about Byzantine history comes from chronicles, letters, laws, sermons, poems, art, coins, seals, archaeological remains, and accounts written by outsiders. Each type of source has strengths and limits. A court historian may praise an emperor too much. A hostile writer may exaggerate an enemy's faults. A law may describe what authorities wanted, not what everyone actually did. Archaeology can show buildings and objects, but not always the feelings of the people who used them. This does not mean we know nothing. It means careful historians compare evidence and remain honest about uncertainty. That uncertainty can be restful rather than frustrating. The past is not a perfectly lit room. It is a landscape at dusk. We see some things clearly, others faintly, and we learn to notice the shapes without pretending every shadow is certain. Fact 89. Byzantium survived for more than 1,000 years because it adapted repeatedly. From the founding of Constantinople in 330 to the fall of the city in 1453, the Byzantine Roman world endured for more than 11 centuries. It survived because it changed. It used Roman institutions, then made them work in Greek. It defended a Mediterranean empire, then learned to survive as a more compact state. It lost cities, rebuilt them, changed allies, revised laws, and renewed culture after disasters. This does not make Byzantium unique in every way, but it does make its endurance remarkable. Many states are remembered for their expansion. Byzantium should also be remembered for recovery. It had a talent for continuing after moments that looked final. The empire eventually ended, as all political states do. But its long life suggests a simple lesson. Resilience is not the absence of trouble. It is the ability to reorganize after trouble has arrived. Fact 90. Byzantine art still shapes how people imagine sacred beauty. Gold backgrounds, solemn faces, domes filled with light, and figures arranged in calm symmetry have become some of the most recognizable features of Byzantine art. These images continue to influence modern artists, architects, worshippers, filmmakers, and designers. Their power comes partly from their stillness. A Byzantine icon does not rush. A mosaic does not need to move. It invites a person to pause and look longer. The art can feel distant at first, but the longer one looks, the more human details appear. A hand raised in blessing, a tilted head, a line of grief, a small foot placed carefully on a floor. This visual patience is one of Byzantium's gifts. It reminds us that beauty does not always need noise or speed. Sometimes it works by staying quiet long enough for the viewer to become quiet too. Fact 91. The Byzantine Empire remains a bridge between ancient and medieval history. Byzantium is often placed between the ancient world and the medieval world, but it was more than a bridge that people simply crossed. It was a civilization in its own right. It preserved Roman law while developing Orthodox theology. It inherited Greek learning while creating new art. It traded with Islamic powers, Western Europeans, Slavic communities, Armenians, Georgians, and many others. It belonged to the past, but it also shaped the future. Thinking of Byzantium as only a leftover of Rome makes it seem smaller than it was. Thinking of it only as a prelude to later empires does the same. Its people lived full lives in their own present. They did not know they were standing between two textbook chapters. They were simply trying to govern, worship, eat, love, work, argue, and rest in a complicated world. Fact 92. The story of Byzantium ends as a state, but not as a memory. When Constantinople fell in 1453, the Byzantine Empire ended politically, yet its memory kept moving. It moved in Orthodox worship, in manuscripts, in legal traditions, in church buildings, in family stories, in place names, and in the continued life of Istanbul. The empire's legacy is not one simple thing, because Byzantium itself was not one simple thing. It was Roman and Greek, Christian and cosmopolitan, ancient and medieval, imperial and local. Its history contains grandeur and hardship, beauty and violence, certainty and disagreement. Perhaps that is why it still feels so alive. It refuses to stay inside one neat category. Tonight, as we leave its domes, harbors, libraries and walls behind, we can carry one final image with us. A city at the edge of dark water, its lights reflected in the Bosporus, still holding the memory of 1,000 years. Fact 93. Byzantine diplomacy often used gifts, titles, and ceremony instead of war. The empire could not always defeat its rivals by force, so its rulers became skilled at diplomacy. Envoys carried letters, gifts, money, marriage proposals, titles, and carefully chosen promises. Foreign visitors to Constantinople could be received in rooms designed to impress them, surrounded by gold, silk, icons, music, and ordered ceremony. The point was not simply vanity. A ruler who appeared wealthy, ancient, and secure could make an alliance. Seem more attractive or an enemy, think twice. Diplomacy also required information. Byzantine officials wanted to know who ruled nearby lands, who their rivals were, what armies could move, and what trade routes mattered. Sometimes a treaty bought only a little time, but a little time could be enough. In a dangerous world, conversation was often another form of defense. Fact 94. Schools kept Greek language and classical learning alive. Education in Byzantium varied greatly by wealth and place, but cities had teachers who instructed students in reading, writing, grammar, rhetoric, and older Greek literature. For elite boys especially, the study of authors such as Homer could form part of a traditional education. Educated students learned to copy, memorize, and speak with care. This training could lead to careers in administration, law, the church, or teaching itself. Girls' education is less fully documented and depended heavily on family circumstances, but women in elite and monastic settings could also be highly literate. The Byzantine schoolroom was not identical to a modern classroom. Books were rare and precious, and learning often involved listening, repetition, and copying. Yet, the underlying idea feels familiar. Language gives people access to a larger world. A well-written sentence could open a path into law, faith, history, or public service. Fact 95. Byzantine chant gave worship a slow, flowing sound. Music was central to Byzantine worship, especially the unaccompanied singing, now known as Byzantine chant. Voices move through long melodic lines shaped by words, prayers, and the acoustics of churches. The sound could be solemn, bright, mournful, or quietly joyful, depending on the feast and the text. Chant was learned through practice and memory, carried from teachers to students over generations. In a domed church, One voice could linger in the air and blend with another until the building itself seemed to sing. The exact music changed over centuries, and traditions differed across regions. Still, the deep connection between worship, poetry, and melody remained. Byzantine chant reminds us that history is not only visual, it also has a soundscape. Footsteps on stone, harbour bells, market calls, and voices rising slowly under a dome. Fact 96. Baths and public water remained part of urban life. The Byzantine world inherited Roman habits of public bathing, although the scale and organization of baths changed over time and from city to city. Baths were practical places for washing, warmth, conversation, and relaxation. They depended on water, fuel, maintenance, and skilled workers. In large cities, public facilities brought together people who might otherwise never share the same room. The experience was not only about cleanliness. It was part of urban life, a pause between work and home. As political conditions and resources shifted, some great Roman bathing complexes declined, while smaller local baths continued. This uneven change is typical of Byzantium. Old systems were not always abandoned all at once. They were repaired, reduced, adapted, or folded into new patterns. A warm bath in a busy city could carry an echo of ancient Rome into the medieval world. Fact 97. Pilgrims traveled across the Byzantine world in search of holy places. Pilgrimage connected distant parts of the Christian world. People traveled to Jerusalem, Rome, Constantinople, Ephesus, Sinai, and countless local shrines associated with saints, relics, and miracles. Some pilgrims were wealthy and traveled with servants. Others walked or joined groups carrying only what they needed. Roads, ports, monasteries, and hospices helped make such journeys possible. Pilgrimage could be an act of devotion, gratitude, repentance, curiosity, or hope for healing. It also created movement. A pilgrim brought stories home, bought small souvenirs, learned new prayers, and met people from other regions. The journey itself could become part of the spiritual experience. In Byzantine life, sacred geography was not far away on a map. It was something people could approach step by ship, mule, cart, or bare feet. Fact 98. Fortresses and roads connected distant parts of the empire. The empire depended on routes that allowed soldiers, officials, merchants, and messages to move. Some roads followed old Roman lines, others were repaired or adapted as needs changed. Fortresses stood at mountain passes, river crossings, coastal points, and border zones. A fortress was not only a place of battle. It could contain stores, wells, families, garrisons, chapels, and small markets. Roads and fortifications worked together. A commander needed to know where troops could march, where animals could find water, and where supplies could be stored. In peacetime, the same routes carried travelers and trade. The Byzantine landscape was therefore threaded with movement. Even a remote village could be connected, however loosely, to the wider world through a track, a bridge, a port, or a military post. Fact 99. Medical writers in Byzantium preserved and adapted earlier knowledge. Byzantine physicians and scholars read works from ancient Greek medicine, including writings associated with Hippocrates and Galen. They also added practical observations and compiled manuals on treatments, diet, surgery, and pharmacy. Medical knowledge was shared across the wider Mediterranean, so Byzantine medicine interacted with traditions from the Islamic world and elsewhere. Not every remedy was effective by modern standards, and illness was often understood through ideas very different from ours. Yet, there was real attention to observation, training, and the organization of care. A doctor might study a pulse, recommend a diet, prepare a mixture, or consult a written text. Hospitals and charitable institutions gave this knowledge a place to be used. The history of medicine is full of uncertainty, but it is also full of people trying patiently to relieve pain with the tools they had. Fact 100. The final lesson of Byzantium is that a civilization can be both enduring and changing. It is tempting to imagine long-lived empires as fixed and unchanging, but Byzantium lasted precisely because it did not remain fixed. Over 11 centuries, its borders shifted, its languages changed, its enemies changed, its art changed, and its institutions changed. The people of the empire continued to think of themselves as Romans. Yet, their Roman identity became something different from what it had been in the age of Augustus. That is not a contradiction. It is how history works. A tradition survives by being carried into new situations. Byzantium changed enough to endure and endured long enough to change again. As this fine fact settles in, there is no need to remember every date or name. It is enough to remember the feeling of a city beside the Bosporus, always looking backward and forward, at once, always finding another way to continue. And now, the lights of Constantinople can grow quieter. The harbour is still. The markets have closed. Somewhere in a distant room, a lamp burns beside a painted icon. Beneath old streets, cool water waits in stone cisterns. Above them, the domes hold the last soft glow of the night. The Byzantine Empire is gone as a state, but its stories still move through books, churches, songs, law, art, and memory. They move as slowly as water through the Bosporus, carrying fragments of Rome, Greece, and 1,000 years of ordinary human life. You do not have to hold every fact in your mind. Let the names drift away when they are ready. Let the walls, mosaics, ships, and quiet libraries become part of the background of your thoughts. History will still be there tomorrow. Thank you for spending this peaceful time with history to fall asleep. Rest well and good night.